So good day to everyone. Again, this is Momakon and I will be giving you an additional presentation about process costing. Let's discuss the similarities between job order and process costing. Both systems assign material, labor, and overhead costs to products, and they provide a mechanism for computing unit product costs. Let us all remember that materials, labor, and overhead are the manufacturing cost. When you combine material and labor, that is the prime cost. When you combine the labor and the overhead, that is the conversion cost. Second, both systems use the same manufacturing accounts, including manufacturing overhead, raw materials, work in process, and finished goods. Some books are using, instead of manufacturing overhead, they are using the factory overhead. If the company is using a controlling account, so what they are using is the factory overhead control. Third, the flow of cost through the manufacturing account is basically the same in both systems. What are the differences between job order and process costing? Process costing is used when a single product is produced on a continuing basis or for a long period of time, while job order costing is used when many different jobs having different production requirements are worked on each period. Systems accumulate cost by department. Job order costing accumulate cost by individual jobs. Process costing systems compute unit cost by department. Job order costing systems compute unit cost by job on the job cost sheet. So as you can see, process costing is on the continuing basis. Costs are accumulated by department, and unit costs are computed by department also. On the other hand, job order costing is used when many different jobs having different production. Job order costing systems accumulate cost by individual jobs, and the computation of unit cost is based on the job cost sheet. Let's have a quick check. Process costing is used for products that are, of course, the answer is similar and produced continuously. Processing departments. Any unit in an organization where materials, labor, or overhead are added to the product. The activities performed in a processing department are performed uniformly on all units of production. Furthermore, the output of a processing department must be homogeneous. Products in a process costing environment typically flow in a sequence from one department to another. So based on this slide, the process is performed uniformly, which means that whatever is applied on a product will be the same process that will be applied on the other products. It is performed uniformly on all products. The output is considered to be homogeneous. Okay, so there is identical. Say homogeneous, identical units. Learning objective number 1. Record the flow of materials, labor, and overhead through a process costing system. So again, materials, labor, and overhead are the total manufacturing cost. Materials and labor are the prime cost. Labor and overhead are the conversion cost. later on, the idea of conversion cost is very important in the process costing system. So what is the flow of materials, labor, and overhead? You combine all the manufacturing cost and put that into process. When it is in the process, options are it will remain to be in process, or it will be completed, or it will be finished. Once it is sold, it will be part of the cost of goods sold. The flow of cost in a job order costing system, as I've mentioned earlier, it is based on job. So costs are traced and applied to individual jobs in a job cost system. But same flow, you have your manufacturing cost accumulated based on individual jobs. Once completed will be part of the finished goods. Once sold will be part of the cost of goods sold. On the other hand, in the flow of cost in a processing costing system, again, all manufacturing costs are accumulated based on department or based on process. So if there are 3 departments, for example, in the manufacturing business, then costs are accumulated on each department. If it is completed, it will be part of the finished goods. If it is sold, it will be part of the cost of goods sold. In analyzing the flows through the use of a T account and journal entry, the given example, process cost flows, the raw materials. Raw materials is actually the direct materials. So, a credit on the raw materials will be forwarded to a debit in the work in process department A. So, the flow of this to this happens when there is an issuance of direct materials into production. Okay, so the direct materials, most commonly, the first department, dyan nilalagay natin ang mga materials natin. But there are also tendencies and possibilities that direct materials are being forwarded on the following or the succeeding department. In terms of journal entry, of course, you will reduce your raw materials and then put it in your work in process inventory account. So as you will notice, there are 2 work in process available here, because one of the characteristics of a process costing system is the presence of more than one work in process inventory. 5 departments, 5 work in process inventory. In terms of flow of labor, of course, a credit of salaries and wages payable, or our payroll, accrued payroll, will be forwarded to the work in process inventory account. Again, just like the normal idea of accumulation of cost, all manufacturing costs are being forwarded to the work in process inventory account. In terms of journal entry, you have your liability here, and if it is used in as a labor for manufacturing or for the factory, then it is to be debited in the work in process inventory account. For the flow of manufacturing overhead cost, so as you can notice here, manufacturing overhead account is being used for the actual and for the applied. Okay, so let's just explain that. accounting for manufacturing overhead, you can use control account. So if you are using control account, what you will be using is the factory overhead control for the actual overhead, and factory overhead applied for the overhead applied. But if you are not using a control system, therefore you can use the manufacturing overhead account title, debit it for the actual overhead, and credit it for the overhead applied to work in process. Okay, as you can notice, application ng overhead ang kino-consider natin for the credit, because a credit in the overhead applied is forwarded to the work in process, to a debit to a work in process inventory account. In terms of journal entry form, again, manufacturing overhead is credited, work in process is debited. If you are using a controlling account, therefore it is factory overhead applied. In terms of transferring from Department A to Department B, so bakit nagkakaroon ng transfer? Because the idea of a process costing system is, once natapos na siya sa unang department, yung completed portion ng Department A, pino-forward kay Department B. So, all of the material cost, labor cost, and overhead applied in Department A, pag natapos yan, so let us say 100 ito. Kung matapos yan lahat, therefore 100 din yung ita-transfer mo sa Department B. Okay, but let us say 80 yung tinransfer mo. So 80 will be transferred here. And the amount being transferred from Department A to Department B will be added to all manufacturing cost naman na in-apply mo or ginamit mo doon sa second department. That's why, class, uulit-ulitin lang natin, in a process cost system, the accumulation of cost is based on department, is per department. In terms of journal entry, you just cancel it or remove it from the work in process of Department A and then transferred it to the work in process of Department B. When the Department B is considered to be the last department, all cost of goods that are being manufactured, since this is the last department, will be forwarded to the finished goods. In terms of journal entry, you just cancel the work in process and then move it to the finished goods. In terms of transferring your finished goods to the cost of goods sold, so of course it will happen if there is a sale. So just the usual, you remove it from your finished goods because you will transfer it in the cost of goods sold. In terms of journal entry, credit it to the finished goods and debit it to the cost of goods sold. Please take note, this is an inventory account. Being an inventory, this is an asset. In this case, this is cost of goods sold, so therefore this is an income statement account. So what is the equivalent units of production? As the title suggests, it is the equivalent unit of production. Equivalent units are the product of the number of partially completed units and the percentage completion of those units. These partially completed units complicate the determination of a department's output for a given period and the unit cost that should be assigned to that output. Let us remember that in a job order system, you will identify the cost of the product once the job is completed. So, makakapag-compute ka ng unit cost pag tapos na yung product. On the other hand, in the process costing system, computation of unit cost happens on a regular basis, usually on a monthly basis when you prepare the cost of production report. So since the identification of the unit cost happens on a monthly or periodical basis, you have to identify or you have to compute for it. And it is a reality that during the end of the month, there is a possibility of the existence of units that are still in process. And if it is still in process, it means it is not 100% completed. Okay? That is why when you compute for the equivalent units of production, you get the percentage of completion of the partially completed units. So let's have this illustration. 2 half completed products are equivalent to 1 complete product. So 10% or 10,000 units with 70% completion are equivalent to 7,000 complete units. So pag sinabi mong equivalent units of production, you are actually restating incomplete to complete units. Okay? So in this case, if it is completed, it's 10,000. But since the percentage of completion is just 70%, therefore, its EUP is just 70,000. You are considering the partially completed units and its percentage of completion. Let's have a quick check. For the current period, Jones started 15,000 units and completed 10,000 units, leaving 5,000 units in process, 30% complete. How many equivalent units of production did Jones have for the period? So the answer is 11,500. How is it computed? 10,000 units is completed. Therefore, 10,000 units, you put it on the entire value, or 10,000 units, 100% completed. 5,000 units, based on the problem, is 30% completed, so you'll just get 30% of it. So that is 1,500. So 10,000 plus 1,500 is the equivalent unit of production of 11,500. In terms of calculating your equivalent units can be calculated in 2 ways. You use a FIFO and you use the weighted average method. Okay. So basically, class, when you use the first in first out method, again, in process beginning is considered. Under the weighted average method, regardless whether the completed is from the in process beginning or from the one which is being started during the period, hindi natin pinapakailaman yun. Regardless of those two, if it is completed, it is considered to be 100% completed. Learning objective number 2, compute the equivalent units of production using the weighted average method. So, again, uulitin lang natin, under the weighted average method, regardless whether it is from the in-process beginning or whether it is from the started during the period, it is considered to be 100% complete. It makes no distinction between the work done in prior or in current periods. Blends together units and cost from prior and current periods. Please take note, units and cost. Determines equivalent units of production for a department by adding together the number of units transferred out plus the equivalent units in ending work in process inventory. when you say class, number of units transferred out, so ito rin yung tinatawag na completed. And based on this, again, hindi niya kinonsider kung meron bang mga work done in prior period dyan. Basta ang sabi niya, if it is completed, it is 100% stage of completion. Treatment of direct labor. Okay. So, direct labor cost may be small in comparison to other product costs in process cost systems. This basically, identical nga yung units na ginagawa natin. The process cost is continuous. Normally, the direct labor is not that significant. That's why direct labor and manufacturing overhead may be combined into one classification of product cost called conversion cost. Ang pag-usapan natin yun kanina. The combination of direct labor and manufacturing overhead is called conversion cost. So let's have an example. Smith Company reported the following activity in the assembly department for the month of June. So you have here work in process beginning of 300. Units started into production in the month of June, 6,000. Units completed and transferred out, 5,400. And work in process, June 30, 900. If we will have a recall on the system's flow or the flow of your product, we have identified before or earlier that there are units to account for and units as accounted for. Okay? So in this case, the units to account for is the beginning and the units started. Kasi in this case, wala namang increase due to addition of materials. So 6,000 and 300, that's 6,300. And units as accounted for is the combination of 5,400 and 900, which is equivalent also to 6,300. Okay? Again, please take note, the units to account for must be equal to the units as accounted. Let us also give attention on the percentage available here. So what is the significance of the percentages here? Ang sinasabi lang dito, class, is that the 300 in process on June 1, in terms of its percentage of completion, 40% is completed based on materials and 20% completed based on conversion cost. The same is true with the work in process. 60% is completed for materials and 30% is completed for the conversion cost. Okay. Pero kagaya nga ng nasabi natin kanina, under the weighted average, wala yung pakailam kung saan galing ang natapos. Kung ang natapos natin is 5,400, wala siyang pakialam if this 5,400 ay kung saan nanggaling. Because if you follow the weighted average method, the 5,400 is considered to be 100% completed. But if you follow the FIFO average, or the FIFO method, you have to know that this 5,400 is actually 300 and 5,100, which means that 300 is from the beginning in process and 5,100 is from that is started in production in June. So ano ba yung importance nito? Kasi later on, itong discussion natin, naka-weighted average to eh. So, bigyan natin ng konting overview kapag ka FIFO yung ginamit natin. Under the FIFO, kino-consider mo kung saan galing yung completed mo. So therefore class, the 300 beginning inventory, kung siya ay already 40% completed na in terms of materials nung June 1, for the month of June, ang kanyang magiging work done ay 60% and 80%. Again, why? Yung 300, bago magsimula ang June, 40% tapos na sa materials, 20% tapos na sa conversion cost. So, kung siya ay nag-undergo ng process nung month of June at siya ay kasama sa natapos, ibig sabihin, for this particular department and this particular period, the month of June, 60% lang ang work done sa kanya in terms of materials and 80% lang in terms of conversion cost. Nasan si 40, nasan si 20? Si 40 at saka si 20, ni-report mo na nung May. Naka-report na siya sa May. Just like this, yung 60 at saka yung 30, naka-report siya sa June. Kung FIFO method yung gagamitin mo, yung 40% at saka yung 70% nito, i-report mo to sa July. Okay? So, later on, we will discuss it into more detailed presentation. But in this case, what you are using or what we are using is the weighted average. Ano, siningitan ko lang class ng kaunting FIFO method. Okay. So, to continue, in the example, weighted average method. So, the first step in calculating the equivalent units is to identify the units completed and transferred out. So, based on the problem presented, 5,400 units. So, yun. So, as you can notice, the 5,400 is 100% completed in terms of materials and 100% completed in terms of conversion cost. Next, the second step is to identify the equivalent units of production in ending work in process. So based on our data, the ending work in process is 900. But since it is still in process, you are to consider the work done. Okay? So let's check. In terms of materials, it is considered to be 60% completed. That's why you get 540. In terms of conversion cost, it is 30% completed, which gives you 270. So when you combine the two, that's 5,400 and 540, as well as 5,400 and 270, you'll get your equivalent units of production for the month of June. Please take note, equivalent units of production always equals to units completed and transferred plus equivalent units in remaining in work in process. So, kailangan ang kukomputan mo ng EUP mo ay yung tapos at yung in process ending. So here, this is just an illustration. Okay. So again, even if it is 40% completed, we follow the weighted average. We disregard that. We consider it as 100% completed for the month of June. In terms of conversion, again, disregard this because it is considered to be 100% completed for the month of June. Next, step learning. Objective number 3, compute the cost per equivalent unit using the weighted average method. So, kanina, you compute for the EUP. Ngayon, you compute for the cost. So, you have here beginning work in process inventory, materials, which is 40% completed. Okay, so these are your information. How are you going to compute for the cost per equivalent unit? Pagsasamahin mo yung cost ng work in process inventory at saka yung cost added in production. And then you will divide it by the equivalent units of production. Yung na-compute mo kanina, when you consider the units, yun yung gagamitin mong denominator. Yung cost mo, edi lahat ng kasamang cost nung units na ginamit mo. Ano ba yung units na ginamit natin dito? In process, beginning, started, in process, end. And, yung completed. Okay? So, pinagsama to. Ito, may kasama yung cost. Alin? Yung cost of beginning working process inventory. Yung started, may kasama rin siyang cost. Alin? Yung cost added during the period. Ito, kinumpitan mo yan ng equivalent unit of production. Obviously, this is 100%. This is depende sa percentage na available. So, combining these two, dividing it by the equivalent units of production, you get the cost per equivalent unit. Okay, so in this case, you just get the total cost, and then you just divide it by the EUP. So 124 divided by 5940, that's 21. 85050 divided by 5670, that's 15. Learning objective number 4. Assign cost to units using the weighted average method. So based on that, equivalent units 540 to 70. Ito yung kinumpute natin kanina. Cost per equivalent units, that's 21 and 15, computed also kanina. She'll be getting 11,340 and 4,050 for a total of 15,390, which means yung iyong ending work in process inventory, ang kanyang cost equivalent ay 15,390. You have to consider itong ending work in process inventory na ito. So, technically, hindi pa siya tapos. Okay? Kung yan ay job costing, malalaman mo yung unit cost niyan pag tapos na yan. Pero since this is process costing, kahit hindi pa siya tapos, malalaman mo na ang unit cost. Bakit nga? Kasi ni-restate mo siya sa kanyang equivalent units of production. So, in this case, 5,400, just multiply it again by the cost per equivalent unit. You get the cost of unit transferred out, so it's 194,400. So, pag pinagsama mo, 194,400 tsaka 15,390, okay, pag pinagsama mo yung dalawa, ito yung lalabas. Okay. How to prepare a cost reconciliation report? Okay, so cost to be accounted for, ito yun, sa 209,790. Yung in-account mo, again, equals silang dalawa. Operation costing. Operation cost is a hybrid of job order and process costing system. So, because it possesses both the attributes of the two. Operation costing is commonly used when batches of many different products pass through the same processing department. Okay, so FIFO method. So, under the FIFO, the computation of equivalent units, the way in which the cost of beginning inventory are treated. So in this case, sabi nga natin kanina, kung 40 siya completed, kung 20 siya completed, for the month of June, 60 at 80 ang pinag-uusapan natin. Okay. Okay. So, dito, as mentioned earlier, 60% yung gagamitin natin. Why? Because 40% completed na siya already. 20% completed already. So, in terms of computation of the equivalent units, 80% ang gagamitin mo. Kasi work done for the month of June, 80%. In terms of cost per equivalent unit using the FIFO method, so dito, magkaiba. Kanina, isinama mo yung cost of the beginning inventory. Ngayon, hindi na. Cost added during the period na lamang ang gagamitin mo. Okay. So, you have computed that. Are you going to assign cost? Okay. Cost of units transferred out, yung entire cost ng beginning inventory, since nakahiwalay na siya, i-present mo siya separately. Bakit? Kasi itong materials na to, ito yung 40% completed, ito yung 20% completed already. Ma'am, nasan po yung 60, nasan yung 20? Yung 80, yung 60 at 80 dito napasama. Okay. Dito siya napasama. Bakit? Kasi yung work done for the month of June, kinonsider siya sa equivalent, sa pagko-compute ng equivalent units to complete.